Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm playing in the Tier 10 French light tank. It is the AMX 13105. Now, when this vehicle was released a year ago, it's not something that I really jumped into. The tanks that I really wanted to get my hands on were the WZ1321, because when the light tanks were initially released, that thing was statistically as good as it is now, whereas the other four vehicles were kind of buffed, and in the form of the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, kind of buffed in some areas but nerfed in others, but overall a buff to the vehicle. Now, the 13105 originally I think had about 360 alpha damage, and so I just couldn't be bothered to play this tank because I thought it was just a bad Chatillon 25T. And while I still think that I'd rather play the Tier 10 French medium tank because it's one of my favorites and most played tanks in the game, and it will always hold a special place in my heart because of that, I've been playing the 13105 a little bit more recently, and I'm starting to realize why this is the highest damaging light tank in the game. That's right, at least on the European server, this vehicle is packing more average damage per game than any other light tank. Better than the WZ1321, the T100LT, the T100LT, and that might be a surprise to a lot of you. In fact, the T100LT is doing just over 1,000, actually exactly 1,300 damage per game, whereas this tank is packing 1,556. That's a significant advantage. However, the win ratio on the T100LT is still higher because the reason why you play that tank is because you want to play the best scout in the game. Certainly not the best damage dealer with 300 alpha, the weakest penetration I believe on its premium rounds. Well, definitely, I know it's got the weakest penetration on its premium rounds. I play that tank all the time and I hate the premium armor piercing rounds on that tank. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't really enjoy this tank compared to the Chatillon is the smaller magazine. It carries 3 105 rounds of ammunition compared to the 5 105 rounds of ammunition that you get on the Chatillon. That's a big difference. That means that this tank can do 1,170 damage, albeit within 5.45 seconds of the first shot, whereas the Chatillon is packing a whopping 1,950. That's enough to kill every single Tier 9 tank and lower, well, even some of the heavy tanks 50% of the time with a single magazine. Whereas the 13105 definitely has to be more of an ambush tank. You go in, you unload your 3 rounds, and then you reload. And that's what you see me doing here to the FV4-202. Now, one thing I'd like to highlight about my plays here is that you saw I unloaded a couple into him, and I reloaded without trying to put in the final shot. And I reload early in this tank, because when you're only reloading 3 shells, it doesn't take the longest time to be able to do that. And I pretended to the FV4-202 that I was still loaded. I was going up after him, and because I didn't want him to quite manage to get me. Now, I have a bit of tunnel vision here. Oh my goodness, a Skoda T50 and a Lerva on my side, but luckily they're tunnel visioning just as bad. Now the Skoda T50 fires 1 into the water and 1 off my turret and fires his 3rd shell. Well, I'm not going to allow him to do that. I have to unload my magazine here against the Czechoslovakian auto-loading medium tank. Skoda T50 is one of those vehicles that's absolutely horrific for when you're playing in your lights, and I know I'm not going to quite finish him off, but I'm just hoping that my team will. So I'm going to task the Carnarvon Action 10 to fire at the Skoda T50, and he does. Thank you very much. I press affirmative, and then I think I'm going to say, like, thanks, bud. Yeah, there you go. TY bud in the chat there. That Carnarvon Action 10 definitely saved my bacon. I don't think that Skoda was going to allow me to keep all of my hit points. He wouldn't have been able to kill me in a single magazine. I would have been able to reload in time. It's actually quite funny how similar these two vehicles are. Obviously one with much better gun handling and way better penetration, and that's really where the 13105 does fall back. All of the Tier 10 light tanks in the game have horrific shell drop-off over long range. Of course, unless you want to pay extra credits and load your gold rounds, and then you've got heat, which doesn't lose any penetration over long range. But the standard penetration on this tank at 234, it's going to drop off about 25% at 500 meters. And what is like 190 millimeters of penetration going to do in a Tier 10, let alone when you get into a nice game against Tier 9 and Tier 8 tanks? And so that's why still, when you want to go for a big damage deal, you want to go for the Chatillon. But then again, we are talking about the highest damage-dealing light tank in the game here, the 13105. So let me talk about some of the advantages that this tank has over the French medium tank. Well, for one, the same camouflage when moving as stationary. And while the camouflage is not nearly as good as the T100LT, it's definitely not terrible, and it's better than the Bat Chatillon and all of the other tier 10 medium tanks while moving, which allows you to make aggressive plays like this. I can try and hopefully get into position without getting spotted by the 75 or the Leopard. And we get spotted towards the end of that run. Now, if I'd been driving in a medium tank there, I would have probably been spotted more towards this location, and that would have probably given the enemy an opportunity to be able to go at us. But again, look at that penetration, just absolutely garbage into the side of the E75. They're unable to go in, but luckily the E75 was tilting his lower plate upwards, which made it exceedingly flat, which allows us to penetrate the 2 remaining shells, and then the T30 on a team finishes him off. And you can see that when you're playing in this tank, if you manage to put in the multiple magazines, then you do in fact start to really pack up some damage. Now, one thing I'm kind of doing as a bit of a misplay here is I'm reversing far more up the slope than I need to. I didn't realize at the time, but the 13105 actually has bad gun depression over the back of the tank, but 8 degrees of gun depression over the front of the vehicle, so definitely use that to your advantage. Alright, so I'm going to slip up into the bushes here, and whoa, Leopard prototype with 1,550 hit points. Is that the standard hit points in that vehicle, or does that mean he's using the stock turret? Oh well, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that I'm going to try and slam 3 shells into him, but I get rather lucky as I bounce a WT Alf Panzer IV. Wow, even if that thing's using the low caliber gun, that's a 128mm. There are very few plates on my tank that could have been able to ricochet that shell, so I expect that that one did bounce off the gun, or a tiny little band off the front of the hull of this vehicle that does actually have 50mm of protection. Alright, so I've talked about the gun depression on this tank. It's better than the Bat Chatillon 25T, which is one of the things that you really need to try and take advantage of if you want to work this tank well. It can kind of peer over a ridgeline way better than its tier 10 French medium tank counterpart can. And of course you want to use your camo rating, and you also got a little bit better mobility as well. Your top speed limit, your reverse is a little bit better. Well, actually your reverse is the same, I believe, as the Bat Chatillon. In fact, it's lower. Can you believe the Bat Chatillon 25T can go backwards at 23 kilometers an hour, and this one's limited to 22 kilometers an hour. But with a decent power to weight ratio of 37.5, you're really able to gun it up a slope, and you've got way better traverse speeds. That's one of the things that really holds back the Bat Chatillon 25T. It's definitely a fast medium tank, but it kind of turns like a boat, and you especially notice that for when you're going around corners. Alright, so 5,800 damage into the game. It looks like this WT Alf Panzer IV, who bounced off me earlier, is hopefully going to become my meal. And what you see me doing is holding my shell, and that's because I'm going to aim for his tracks. And that's because at the time, I was trying to do a mission where I had to immobilize the enemy vehicle and then, I guess, kill them, right? And for some reason, our 390 alpha damage fails to take off the tracks of the WT Alf Panzer IV, and I don't even know how I messed up that shot, but okay. One mistake at the end of the game, I guess, when it's already over, but that disaster there actually means that we don't pick up our 4th kill, and I was kind of worried that maybe we weren't going to pick up an ace, even though we did. 9,000 combined here in just under 8 minutes. And I don't know why I'm acting so surprised, really. This second season of personal missions that I think are absolutely awful have been recently making me play like a complete muppet, but I've just got to plow through them. Anyway, I digress. Let's focus on the post-game stats. So a high caliber for that 6,652 damage dealt, but I would like to clarify, this is not an average game for my 13105. I feel like I'm having a good day if I can average about 2,400 damage in this vehicle, and because we didn't fire many heat rounds here, we make a great profit irrelevant of using some kind of personal reserve. And for any of you who are interested, here are the EU statistics on whatlife.com, showing you the average damages of the highest dealing light tanks in the game. So while it's unsurprising that all of the tier 10 tanks are on top of this list, look at this. AMX 1357, a tier 7 tank, doing better than so many tier 9 and tier 8 vehicles, and even outperforming both variants of the tier 8 premium German light tank, the M4190. Other things that made me giggle while I was looking down the light tank damage dealing list is, oh yeah, look, the Panzer II Ausführung J, i.e. one of the biggest gold noob tanks in the game, is casually winning 63%. And that's an average. So for every donkey out there who's winning 50% of their games, there's somebody out there who's smashing 75% of their games. And also the fact that this tank is dealing the same amount of damage as an MT25 and higher damage than the M24 Chaffee just makes me kind of itch, really, at the idea that they still keep selling this in €100 gold packages. And funnily enough, at the bottom of damage dealing in the game for light tanks, it's the Renault FT. So that's quite a contrast. You start at the bottom and then you work your way all the way towards the top when you reach the end goal. So the AMX 13105, do I think it's an incredible tank and you should rush out to be able to get it? And no, not really. If for some reason you have to play a light tank, then this vehicle might be preferable to playing the Bat Chatillon 25T. But really, to all intents and purposes, the Bat Chatillon 25T can do 80 or 90% of the reconnaissance and scouting role that this tank can, but its damage dealing capacity is definitely at least 25 to 30% higher, so it's at least in my opinion, the stronger overall light tank. And still, if you want to go and be a scout, go and get yourself a T100 LT. There's really no competition for that tank. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for another World of Tanks Tech Tree Showcase on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And this week, 437 of you have voted, and most of you want to see one of the most brutal tanks in the game. Funnily enough, another French autoloading tank, the AMX 50 Foch B, a tank capable of doing 2,400 damage within 10 seconds of the first shot, pretty much clipping any tank apart from the biggest of heavies. And if you've never been to one of my Tech Tree showcases before, they're basically like miniature tank reviews all the way up the tree, starting from tier 1 and ending up at tier 10, so you can see if it's a line that's maybe worth grinding, or alternatively, if you already have the tanks, pick up a few tips and tricks in them. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.